In the vast expanse of the universe, where the unknown lurks in every corner, one desperate cry echoed through the stars. An alien, broken and lost, reached out for help. It was a single human who would answer the call, forever changing her fate. But what happened next? A story of courage, compassion, and a bond that defied the boundaries of space awaits. Get ready, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about life, the universe, and the unexpected heroism of one man. It was a quiet night on Earth, the kind where the only sounds you could hear were the whispers of the wind and the hum of distant traffic. Far, far beyond our world, something was stirring. A cry, weak and filled with pain, echoed through the deep abyss of space. It wasn't a human voice, nor was it from any creature we had ever encountered before. It was the voice of an alien, broken and calling out for help. The stars twinkled, indifferent to the cries that traveled through the vastness of space. But to the alien woman, whose life was hanging by a thread, the stars were her only hope. Her ship had been damaged in an uncharted sector of the galaxy, and she was stranded. She had no way of knowing if anyone would hear her, no way of knowing if help would come. Her species, long considered peaceful and wise, had always been in control of their destiny. But now, in a dark corner of space, she was alone, desperate, vulnerable, and scared. Her people had once been admired across the galaxy for their technological advancements, their peaceful nature, and their deep understanding of the universe. But now, everything had come crashing down. She could feel the life force within her flickering as her ship's power began to dwindle. The alien woman had only one option left: to send out a distress signal, a plea for help, no matter how slim the chances were that someone would answer. On Earth, the distress signal reached an unsuspecting man, a human named Jason. He was an engineer, a man who had always dreamed of something more. Despite his quiet life on a small farm in the countryside, he had always looked up at the stars, wondering if there was more to this universe than what met the eye. Little did he know that tonight, that dream would be realized in the most unimaginable way. Jason was in his workshop, tinkering with one of his latest projects, when his communication device suddenly lit up. He wasn't expecting anyone, certainly, not anything this strange. His heart raced as he checked the signal. It wasn't a standard message. The words on his screen made no sense, the language unfamiliar and unrecognizable. But then something caught his pattern, a cry of distress embedded in the transmission. Despite his confusion and skepticism, Jason did something no one else might have dared to do. He responded. He didn't know it yet. But this simple act of kindness, is reaching out to answer a cry from the stars, would change the course of history. For the first time in his life, Jason realized he wasn't just fixing machines. He was about to be part of something that would shake the very foundation of the universe. The alien's cry for help had been heard, and with that, a bond was about to form, a connection between two beings from different worlds that would defy the very laws of nature itself. Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening. His hands trembled as he adjusted the controls, trying to decipher the alien message. It was unlike anything he'd ever encountered, but there was something deeply human in the distress. A raw emotion that reached through the static of the unknown. It wasn't just a signal, it was a cry for help. For hours he worked tirelessly in his workshop, piecing together this strange transmission. As the night wore on, his frustration grew. The language was too foreign, the technology too advanced for him to understand in a single sitting. But he couldn't walk away, not when he felt the weight of her plea pressing on his heart. He made one last attempt. This time, he focused on the rhythm of the message, the subtle patterns that seemed to pulse with emotion. Slowly, the strange sounds began to align into something he could almost comprehend. Words, if you could call them, that whispers of a language far beyond human understanding. Then, as if by some cosmic miracle, the alien voice came through loud and clear. "Help. Broken," she said, each word tinged with a mixture of fear and desperation. Jason's heart stopped. He had heard her voice. The alien woman's cry had transcended the vast chasm of space and now resonated in his very soul. He didn't know what to do next, but he knew he couldn't ignore her. He took a deep breath, his mind racing as he tried to think of a way to communicate back. After several moments of silence, Jason spoke into the microphone, his voice steady but uncertain. "Hello, Can you hear me? This is Jason. I'm here to help you. The alien's voice crackled through the speakers once more, this time clearer, more direct. Please, need repair. Ship. The transmission was fading fast, but Jason understood enough. She needed help. Her ship was damaged, and she was stranded somewhere in the cosmos. Jason's mind began to race. How could he help? He was no astronaut, no scientist of the stars. He was just an ordinary man with a love for machines. Yet in this moment, he realized that his skills, though humble, might be the key to saving her. He had always been a problem solver, a tinkerer who could fix anything. And now, this strange woman from a faraway world had put her trust in him. With a renewed sense of purpose, Jason set to work. He used his engineering knowledge to modify his communication device, attempting to establish a clearer, more direct link with the alien. The pieces were coming together, but he knew time was running out. The alien's distress signal was weak, and every second counted. The alien woman's voice, although faint, sounded almost relieved when she spoke again. Thank you, human, please, hurry, double quotes. Jason's heart swelled with determination. He wasn't sure how he could help someone from another world, but one thing was certain, he wouldn't let her down. This was no longer just a chance encounter. This was the beginning of something far bigger, and he was about to take the first step into the unknown. The next few days passed in a blur of calculations, adjustments, sleepless nights for Jason. His workshop, once a quiet haven for tinkering, had become a makeshift mission control center. The hum of machines filled the air as he worked tirelessly to modify his equipment, trying to find a way to communicate more effectively with the alien woman. He didn't understand her technology, but he could tell that her situation was dire. Time was running out. Jason's mind raced as he pondered the unimaginable. A creature from another world was reaching out for help, and somehow he had become the one to answer. The weight of the responsibility hung over him, but at the same time, a fire was ignited within him, a fire fueled by curiosity, compassion, and the knowledge that he could make a difference. The first few attempts at communication were strained. He struggled to decipher the alien language, but every breakthrough felt like a victory. He realized that the alien woman was just asking for help. She was trusting him with her life. Oh, and that trust was something Jason couldn't take lightly. As he worked on the repairs for her ship, Jason's mind drifted to the unimaginable possibilities. What would this alien woman look like? What kind of being was she? How had she ended up stranded so far from home? But most pressing of all, what was he about to get himself into? He had no answers. But one thing was clear. He was about to embark on a journey that would change everything he thought he knew about the universe. Days later, Jason finally succeeded in making the connection clearer. Through his makeshift communication system, he was able to hear her voice again, though this time it was more stable, more certain. Thank you, human, she said, her voice a strange mix of relief and gratitude. I am Zora. I am stranded on a remote planet in the Hadean system. My ship is severely damaged, and I cannot repair it alone. Will you help me? Zora's words were like a lifeline thrown across the galaxy, pulling Jason into a reality that felt more like a dream than anything he had ever known. He didn't fully understand what she was asking, but there was no hesitation in his response. I'll help you, Zora. I promise you. The connection between them was now stronger than ever. The alien woman had given him coordinates, a distant, unknown planet at the edge of the galaxy. It was a place no human had ever visited, a place where no rescue mission had ever ventured. But Jason wasn't about to let that stop him. He was determined to make the impossible happen. Jason knew that in order to reach her, he would need to use every resource at his disposal. His workshop became a hub of activity as he researched spacecraft construction, repaired communication devices, and gathered materials. The task ahead was monumental, but for the first time in his life, Jason felt like he was part of something greater than himself. This was his calling. As the final adjustments were made to his makeshift spacecraft, Jason stood at the entrance of the workshop, looking up at the stars. The vastness of space, once an abstract concept, now felt so real, so close. And beyond those stars was Zora, waiting for help. Jason was ready. His heart beat with excitement, but also with fear. What awaited him in the unknown? Could he really help her? But as the countdown began, one thing was certain: he wasn't turning back. The day Jason had prepared for had finally arrived. His makeshift spacecraft, an assembly of parts from old machinery and salvaged equipment, stood ready. It wasn't much, barely enough to make it to the Hadean system, let alone return. But in that moment, Jason didn't care about the risks. Zora needed him, and that was all that mattered. Before he boarded, Jason took one last look around the small farm that had been his home for so many years. It felt like a lifetime ago that he had dreamt of something more, something beyond the quiet fields and small-town life. Now, here he was, about to leave everything behind and venture into the vastness of space. His heart raced as he climbed into the cockpit. The controls were rudimentary at best, and the systems were far from optimal, but he had no choice. He pressed a series of buttons, initiating the launch sequence. The countdown began. The sound of the engine roaring to life was both thrilling and terrifying. The ground beneath him shook as the spacecraft slowly lifted off the Earth's surface. Jason's eyes were glued to the stars outside the small window, knowing that each moment brought him closer to the alien woman who had reached out to him for help. As the spacecraft broke through the atmosphere, Jason felt the weightlessness of space for the first time. His body was pulled into the seat as the craft accelerated toward the unknown. The engines hummed steadily, the only sound in the otherwise silent void. His thoughts kept racing. Would he find Zora alive? Was the damage to her ship more extensive than she let on? And what awaited him on that distant planet? The journey was long and isolating. Jason spent his days studying the star maps Zora had provided, learning more about the Hadean system, the planet where she was stranded, and the alien technology she had described. Though the distance between Earth and the Hadean system was vast, Jason focused on the small victories each successful system check, each step forward. As the days passed, Jason grew increasingly accustomed to life in space. The cramped quarters of the ship became his new reality, and he developed a routine to keep himself busy. Yet despite the distractions, he couldn't shake the nagging sense of uncertainty. He had never been to space before, let alone on a mission to rescue an alien from a distant galaxy. Every twist and turn of the spacecraft felt like a reminder of how little he knew about the mission at hand. Still, his resolve didn't waver. He had made a promise to Zora, and he intended to keep it. On the sixth day of the journey, a signal came through. It was faint at first, but Jason recognized it immediately, the unmistakable sound of Zora's voice. "Jason, you're close. The planet. It is just ahead. Please. Hurry." Her words were filled with urgency, but there was also a quiet strength in her voice. Jason's heart surged. He was close, so close to the alien woman who had trusted him. But as the distant planet came into view, he realized that the hardest part of the journey was just beginning. What awaited him on that remote world? Is it truly a place of danger and despair, as Zora had described? Or was there something more? Something that would change both of their lives forever? As Jason's spacecraft neared the Hadean system, the vast expanse of space seemed to grow darker, more foreboding. The star that illuminated the system was a distant, faint light, small and far away in the cold, empty stretch of the universe. But as his ship approached the planet Zora had described, a strange unease settled over him. This wasn't the welcoming, vibrant world he had imagined. Instead, it was a lifeless rock shrouded in clouds and shadows, with an eerie glow emanating from beneath its surface. The readings on his instruments were unsettling. The planet's atmosphere was thick with strange gases, and the terrain below appeared barren and desolate. There were no signs of life, no buzzing cities, no signals from alien civilization. It was as if the planet had been abandoned by time itself, left to linger in the silence of the cosmos. Jason steadied himself, focusing on the task at hand. The landing wasn't going to be easy. His ship, though sturdy, was a far cry from the sleek spacecraft that most space travelers used. It was pieced together from scrap materials, held together by the determination of one human and the trust of an alien. But as he descended toward the planet's surface, Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The ship shuddered as it cut through the atmosphere, its engines straining against the thick air. The planet's gravity pulled at him, and Jason felt the weight of every decision, every moment that had led him to this point. As he adjusted the controls, he glanced at the viewfinder, watching the barren landscape grow larger in the window. It was a barren wasteland, broken, with jagged mountains rising like the skeletal remains of a forgotten world. He wasn't sure what to expect, but what he saw ahead was even more troubling. A giant crater, surrounded by ruins of ancient structures, dominated the planet's surface. The site seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, an abandoned city that once might have been full of life, but now lay in ruin. There were no signs of any active life forms, just decay and silence. Jason's hands tightened on the controls as he guided the ship closer to the ground. He couldn't help but feel a chill as he neared the surface. Something about this planet felt wrong, as though it was hiding a dark secret. He thought about Zora, who had trusted him to help her. What had happened here? Why was she stranded on such a desolate world? Finally, the ship touched down with a heavy thud, sending a jolt through Jason's body. He unbuckled himself from the seat and slowly stood up, his heart racing. As he opened the hatch and stepped out onto the planet's surface, the cold air hit him like a wall. The ground beneath his boots was rough and uneven, with rocks scattered across the barren wasteland. Ahead of him, he could see Zora's ship, her once advanced technology now a twisted, broken wreck, just as she had described. It was a strange sight. A craft designed for space travel, now reduced to a pile of debris, half buried in the dust. The damage was extensive, and Jason knew it would take far more than just a few repairs to make it functional again. But that wasn't his only concern. As Jason approached the wreckage, he heard a faint sound, a soft, distant cry. His heart skipped a beat. Zora. She was close. But where was she? Why couldn't he see her? The unsettling silence of the planet seemed to press in on him as he moved closer to the wreckage. With each step, his mind raced. Was there more to this planet than he could see? Was it truly abandoned, or was something else hiding in the shadows? He had to find Zora, and he had to do it quickly. Time was running out, and with every passing second, the mystery of this alien world grew darker. Jason moved cautiously through the wreckage of Zora's ship, his boots crunching on the dust-covered ground. The air felt thick, as if the very atmosphere of the planet had been poisoned by time and neglect. He looked around, hoping for any sign of life, but there was nothing, just the desolation of an abandoned world. His heart raced as he called out, his voice echoing off the crumbling structures around him. "Zora, where are you?" he shouted, his voice trembling slightly with concern. For a moment, there was only silence. Then faintly, he heard a response, a weak, almost inaudible voice that sounded like it was coming from deep within the wreckage. "Jason here." His breath caught in his throat. The voice was unmistakable. It was Zora, but it was different. Her voice was strained, weak, barely a whisper. Without a second thought, Jason sprinted toward the source of the sound. The ruins were harder to navigate than he'd expected, the jagged metal and broken machinery making each step treacherous. But his mind was focused solely on finding her. As he rounded a corner, Jason finally saw her. She was slumped against the side of her ship, her pale skin nearly blending into the dust-covered surface of the wreckage. Zora's once bright eyes were now dull, filled with exhaustion and pain. Her body was frail, and it was clear that she had been suffering for far longer than Jason had anticipated. "Zora," he exclaimed, rushing to her side. Her eyes flickered open, and she gave him a faint smile, though it seemed more like a grimace. "You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jason knelt beside her, his heart aching at the sight of the alien woman in such a state. Her usual calm and composed demeanor was gone, replaced by an overwhelming vulnerability. He could see that she was struggling just to stay conscious, her breathing shallow and labored. "What happened to you?" Jason asked, his voice thick with concern. "You didn't tell me it was this bad?" Zora's gaze shifted toward her ship. The ship. "It was attacked," she managed to say, her words slow and painful. "I was ambushed by a rogue faction, my own kind. They damaged my ship and left me here to die." Jason's heart sank. He hadn't been prepared for this. He had thought that her situation was a simple repair job, something he could fix with his skills. But this was more than just mechanical failure. It was a betrayal of the worst kind. She had been stranded by her own people. "Who did this to you?" Jason asked, anger building within him. Zora closed her eyes for a moment, as if summoning the strength to continue. "It doesn't matter," she said softly. "What matters now is that I survive. You have to help me fix the ship. If I don't leave this planet soon, I won't make it. My species. We need energy to live. Without it, we die. Jason's mind raced. He didn't fully understand what Zora meant by energy, but it was clear that time was running out for her. Every moment spent on this desolate planet seemed to drain her strength further. He looked at her ship. Its systems were shot, and there was no way he could repair it with the limited resources he had. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. He had come this far, and he was going to let her die here alone, and abandoned by the very people who should have protected her. I won't leave you here, Jason said firmly, meeting her gaze. We'll get you off this planet. Promise. Zora managed another faint smile, though it was tinged with sadness. Thank you, Jason. You don't know what this means to me. As Jason looked down at her, he realized that this journey was no longer just about repairing a ship. It was about saving a life, about protecting someone who had been left to suffer alone. And with that realization came a new sense of purpose. No matter what it took, he was going to get Zora off this planet. But the question remained, how? Jason stood over the wreckage of Zora's ship, his mind whirling. He had no idea how to fix her ship with the limited resources he had, and time was rapidly running out. Zora's condition was worsening by the hour, her breath shallow, and her once vibrant skin now a dull, almost translucent shade. If he didn't act soon, she wouldn't survive. How much time do you have left? Jason asked, kneeling beside her. His voice was quiet, but the urgency was unmistakable. Zora's eyes fluttered open, and she gave him a weak, tired look. A few days, maybe less, without the energy. I won't last. Jason clenched his fists. The situation was dire, and he had to think fast. Her species, whatever they were, relied on some form of energy that he didn't understand. But he knew one thing for sure. He had to find a way to generate this energy. If there was any hope of saving her. Tell me more about the energy you need, Jason said, trying to gather as much information as possible. What kind of energy is it? Can I find it here? Zora's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but she was too weak. It's not like your energy, she murmured. We harness power from the core of planets, deep inside, geothermal sources. But this planet has no active core. It's dormant, dead. Jason's heart sank. If the planet's core was inactive, it meant there was no natural energy source to draw from. The idea of using solar panels or wind turbines wouldn't work here. There was no sun to speak of, and the atmosphere was too thick to generate any significant wind power. Desperation clawed at him. He scanned the desolate landscape around him, his eyes scanning for anything that might give him a clue. And then, as if by some twist of fate, he spotted something in the distance, something that could potentially provide the solution he needed. There, half buried in the ground, was a strange structure. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before, a series of metallic pillars, jagged and dark, protruding from the earth, like the remains of an ancient machine. Something about it seemed to pulse with a faint, unnatural glow. Zora, Jason called, turning to her. Do you know what this is? Zora's eyes followed his gaze, her expression one of confusion. I don't know, I've never seen it before. But I think it's related to the energy I need. Jason's pulse quickened. This could be the energy source he had been searching for. He didn't fully understand how it worked, but it was his only hope. We have to get to that structure, Jason said, determination in his voice. It might be our only chance. Zora weakly nodded. Be careful. The energy. It's unstable. It could be dangerous. Jason didn't hesitate. He grabbed a pack of tools from the spacecraft, checked the systems one last time to make sure they were functioning as best as they could, and set off toward the glowing structure. The journey was not easy. The ground was uneven, and the air was thin, making each step more exhausting than the last. Jason's mind raced as he approached the pillars. The closer he got, the stronger the pulsing energy felt. It seemed to vibrate in the air, sending small shocks through the ground beneath him. He reached the base of the structure, his fingers trembling as he examined the glowing panels. The energy source was clearly active, but he had no idea how to harness it. He scanned the area for any clues, any way to tap into the power it seemed to offer. As he worked, the feeling of urgency began to mount. Zora was depending on him, and every second that passed was another second that her life hung in the balance. With a deep breath, Jason knew what he had to do. was risky, dangerous even, but it was the only chance they had. He began to work with the structure, using his engineering knowledge to interface with the alien technology. The panels lit up, and the energy began to surge. Now, the question was, would it be enough to save Zora? The energy from the strange structure surged through the air, vibrating like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Jason's hands flew across the panels, his mind focused solely on getting the alien technology to work. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to stabilize the flow of power, connecting wires and adjusting settings with the precision he had learned from years of tinkering. But this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The metal panels hummed with life as Jason worked, each click of the controls sending a wave of heat and light into the air around him. His sweat trickled down his face, his muscles aching from the strain. But he couldn't stop, not now. Zora needed this. The planet itself seemed to pulse with the energy, and the air was thick with an almost electrical charge. For a moment it felt as though the world around him was holding its breath. The unstable structure beneath his hands seemed to groan, the glow of the energy shifting between pale blue and deep violet. Jason's fingers hovered over the final switch. One wrong move, and the entire system could collapse. But he had no choice. He had come this far. With a deep breath, Jason flipped the switch. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Then, like the roar of 1,000 engines, the structure came to life. The ground beneath Jason's feet trembled as energy shot upward, crackling through the air. The glowing panels pulsed with vibrant energy, casting an eerie light across the desolate landscape. Jason stumbled back, shielding his eyes from the intense brightness. He could feel the heat radiating from the structure, and for a moment, he thought the entire planet might explode in a burst of raw power. But then, the energy began to stabilize. The lights shifted to a steady, powerful glow, and the hum of the structure became a deep, resonant thrum that echoed through the ground. Jason stood in awe, his breath coming in short gasps. He had done it. He had tapped into the planet's energy core. It was no longer unstable. The power was now flowing freely. With a feeling of cautious hope, Jason pulled out his communication device and sent a signal to Zora's ship. "Zora, it's working. The energy's flowing now. It's stable. Think we have a shot." Moments later, Zora's faint voice crackled through the speaker. "Jason, you did it." Her voice was weak but full of relief. Jason's heart skipped a beat. She was still hanging on. "I'm coming back to you," he said, his voice full of resolve. "I've got the energy you need." On. He turned and sprinted back toward her, the power in his hands now, his only hope for saving her. As he approached her ship, he saw Zora still slumped against the wreckage, her condition worse than before. Her skin was even paler now, and she looked weaker with each passing moment. But there was a faint glimmer of life in her eyes. As she saw Jason return with the energy source, "I've got it," Jason said breathlessly, holding up the portable energy converter. "We can fix your ship now. You're going to make it." Zora looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "I never thought I'd see this day. I thought I was going to die here." Jason knelt beside her, connecting the energy converter to her ship's damaged systems. "Not today. I'm not leaving you here, Zora." The hum of the energy converter grew louder, filling the air with a sound that resonated with both power and hope. Slowly, the lights on Zora's ship flickered to life. The engines, which had been silent for so long, hummed gently, coming back to life with a soft whir. Zora's eyes widened as the ship's systems began to repair themselves. "It's working. You actually did it." Jason smiled, exhausted but filled with a sense of accomplishment. "I promised you I would." Now, as the ship's power returned and Zora's condition began to stabilize, Jason realized that they had overcome the first major hurdle. But they were far from safe. The rogue faction that had attacked Zora was still out there, and they would stop at nothing to finish what they had started. Jason's heart pounded with the knowledge that the real battle was just beginning. The energy from the strange structure surged through the air, vibrating like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Jason's hands flew across the panels, his mind focused solely on getting the alien technology to work. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to stabilize the flow of power, connecting wires and adjusting settings with the precision he had learned from years of tinkering. But this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The metal panels hummed with life as Jason worked, each click of the controls sending a wave of heat and light into the air around him. His sweat trickled down his face, his muscles aching from the strain. But he couldn't stop, not now. Zora needed this. The planet itself seemed to pulse with the energy, and the air was thick with an almost electrical charge. For a moment it felt as though the world around him was holding its breath. The unstable structure beneath his hands seemed to groan, the glow of the energy shifting between pale blue and deep violet. Jason's fingers hovered over the final switch. One wrong move, and the entire system could collapse. But he had no choice. He had come this far. With a deep breath, Jason flipped the switch. For a heartbeat, everything went still. Then, like the roar of 1,000 engines, the structure came to life. The ground beneath Jason's feet trembled as energy shot upward, crackling through the air. The glowing panels pulsed with vibrant energy, casting an eerie light across the desolate landscape. Jason stumbled back, shielding his eyes from the intense brightness. He could feel the heat radiating from the structure, and for a moment, he thought the entire planet might explode in a burst of raw power. But then, the energy began to stabilize. The lights shifted to a steady, powerful glow, and the hum of the structure became a deep, resonant thrum that echoed through the ground. Jason stood in awe, his breath coming in short gasps. He had done it. He had tapped into the planet's energy core. It was no longer unstable. The power was now flowing freely. With a feeling of cautious hope, Jason pulled out his communication device and sent a signal to Zora's ship. "Zora, it's working. The energy's flowing now. It's stable. Think we have a shot." Moments later, Zora's faint voice crackled through the speaker. "Jason, you did it." Her voice was weak but full of relief. Jason's heart skipped a beat. She was still hanging on. "I'm coming back to you," he said, his voice full of resolve. "I've got the energy you need." On. He turned and sprinted back toward her, the power in his hands now, his only hope for saving her. As he approached her ship, he saw Zora still slumped against the wreckage, her condition worse than before. Her skin was even paler now, and she looked weaker with each passing moment. But there was a faint glimmer of life in her eyes. As she saw Jason return with the energy source, "I've got it," Jason said breathlessly, holding up the portable energy converter. "We can fix your ship now. You're going to make it." Zora looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "I never thought I'd see this day. I thought I was going to die here." Jason knelt beside her, connecting the energy converter to her ship's damaged systems. "Not today. I'm not leaving you here, Zora." The hum of the energy converter grew louder, filling the air with a sound that resonated with both power and hope. Slowly, the lights on Zora's ship flickered to life. The engines, which had been silent for so long, hummed gently, coming back to life with a soft whir. Zora's eyes widened as the ship's systems began to repair themselves. "It's working. You actually did it." Jason smiled, exhausted, but filled with a sense of accomplishment. "I promised you I would." Now, as the ship's power returned and Zora's condition began to stabilize, Jason realized that they had overcome the first major hurdle. But they were far from safe. The rogue faction that had attacked Zora was still out there, and they would stop at nothing to finish what they had started. Jason's heart pounded with the knowledge that the real battle was just beginning. The cloaking device was their only hope. Jason's heart pounded as he gently guided the ship through the starry void. The silent hum of the engines, the only sound breaking the eerie stillness. He kept his hands steady on the controls, every muscle in his body tensed, as he focused on evading the rogue faction that was hunting them. The radar blips grew larger and larger as the enemy ships closed in, but the cloaking device for the moment kept them undetected. It was a temporary solution, and Jason knew they couldn't hide forever. They had only minutes before the enemy ships would break through the temporary invisibility field. Question was, how far could they get before they were exposed? Jason glanced at Zora. Her eyes, though still filled with gratitude, were now shadowed with fear. She knew what was at stake as much as he did. The rogue faction was on T just after her. They wanted to eliminate any trace of her people-less technology. To ensure their dominance in the galaxy, she had seen it happen before, in the destruction of her home planet, and now she was part of a rebellion to stop them. "We need a plan," Jason said, his voice firm despite the tension. "We can't just keep running. We need to make a jump. If I can get us to a nearby asteroid field, we might be able to hide in the debris, but that's a long shot." Zora nodded, her gaze sharpening with resolve. "Do it, I'll help guide you." Jason took a deep breath, making a split-second decision. "All right, I'm going to push the ship to full speed. If we can get to the field before they lock onto us, we might just have a chance." He slammed the throttle forward, and the ship surged ahead, its engines roaring to life. The stars outside the window blurred into streaks of light as they hurtled through space. Jason's mind raced, calculating the distances, the trajectories, and the time it would take for the enemy to catch up. The ship's cloaking device flickered, momentarily losing its effect as Jason pushed the vessel beyond its usual limits. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he maintained his focus, the asteroid field now in sight. The rogue faction's ships, which had been tracking them, were closing in fast. Zora spoke up, her voice steady despite the tension. "They've almost broken through the cloak. We've got to make it to the field now." Jason didn't need to hear more. He directed the ship toward the asteroid field. The debris from countless ancient collisions forming a dense, chaotic maze of rock and dust. It was their only hope. The field could hide them if they could weave through it fast enough. As the first enemy ship broke the cloak's distortion and fired its weapons, Jason maneuvered the ship with precision, weaving between massive asteroids, dodging blasts of energy from the enemy. Every second felt like an eternity. Every turn and twist of the ship, a desperate gamble. The rogue ships behind them fired again, the energy blasts lighting up the darkness of space, missing them by inches. Jason could feel the pressure building. The debris field was their only chance, and they had to make it count. "We're almost there," Zora shouted. Jason steered the ship hard left, narrowly missing a colossal asteroid. The enemy was gaining, their weapons charging for another attack. But then, just as they neared the densest part of the field, Jason slammed the ship into a series of quick turns, forcing the pursuing ships to break formation. The rogue faction's ships were not as nimble, and they struggled to keep up with the rapidly changing terrain. The explosions from the enemy ships shook the space around them, but they couldn't touch Jason and Zora. The ship ducked behind a large asteroid, disappearing into the shadowed debris, hidden for just a moment. "We lost them," Jason whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Zora's relief was palpable, though her exhaustion was evident. "We did it. You did it." Jason exhaled slowly, realizing the danger they had just narrowly escaped. But even as the immediate threat faded, he knew the battle wasn't over. They had bought themselves time, but they were still in enemy territory. The rogue faction would regroup, and it wouldn't be long before they came looking for them again. But for now, Jason allowed himself a small moment of triumph. They had survived, and that meant there was still hope. The asteroid field stretched out before them, a jagged maze of rocky fragments floating in the silent void. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the ship was still. The hum of the engines softened, and the flashing lights of the cockpit dimmed slightly as Jason carefully slowed their speed, guiding them deeper into the debris. The rogue faction had been shaken off for now. Jason leaned back in his seat, letting out a deep breath, his hands still gripping the controls but with less tension. The immediate danger had passed, but his mind kept racing, replaying every move he had made to evade the enemy. It had been close. Too close. Zora, who had remained silent during the tense moments of their escape, finally spoke. Her voice was quieter than usual, a softness that betrayed the exhaustion she was feeling. "Thank you, Jason. You saved my life, my people's chance for survival." Jason glanced over at her, his heart aching at the sight of her fragile form. Despite her alien strength, she had been through so much. The betrayal from her own kind, the crash, the struggle for survival, it had all taken a toll. And now, with the rogue faction still out there, their fight was far from over. "We made it this far," Jason said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "But I don't think we're out of the woods yet. The rogue faction will regroup, and they won't stop looking for you. I don't know what happens next, but we'll figure it out." Zora's tired eyes met his, her expression thoughtful but grateful. "I never imagined a human would be the one to help me, to give me hope again. You're not like the others. You don't see me as just a tool or an enemy. You've shown me more kindness than I ever thought possible." Jason shrugged, not knowing how to respond. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who had been in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place, depending on how you looked at it. He had no experience with alien species, no training for space battles or galactic diplomacy. He had just acted out of instinct and compassion. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," Jason said, his voice quiet. "But I couldn't let you die out here. You trusted me. I wasn't about to abandon you." Zora nodded, and for a moment the ship was filled with an almost comforting silence. The stars beyond the asteroid field seemed to glow brighter, and the tension that had filled the air since their arrival on the planet seemed to lift, even if only for a short time. "Jason," Zora said after a long pause, "there's something you should know. The Rogue faction. They are more powerful than you realize. They have ships beyond anything you've seen, and they are relentless. I can sense their presence across the stars. It will stop at nothing to destroy us." Jason's stomach tightened at her words. He knew they had escaped, but he had also known that their troubles were far from over. The Rogue faction wasn't going to back off. They had a purpose, and they had the resources to carry it out. And Zora, her survival was at the heart of that mission. "I'll be ready for them," Jason said, his voice resolute. "But we need to figure out our next move. We can't stay here forever. There's got to be a way to stop them. To end this fight before it gets worse." Zora's eyes narrowed, a glimmer of something, perhaps determination or strategy, shining in her gaze. "We need allies. There are others in the galaxy who are against the Rogue faction. I can help you find them." Jason looked out the cockpit window, the vastness of space stretching endlessly before them. The quiet, eerie calm of the asteroid field provided a fleeting sense of peace, but it was clear that this was only a brief respite. The real battle was just beginning. The silence of the asteroid field stretched on, and for a moment it felt as though time had stopped. Jason sat at the controls of the ship, his fingers lightly grazing the console as his mind raced. The safety they had found among the rocks and debris was only temporary, a brief moment of peace before the storm hit again. The Rogue faction was still out there, hunting for Zora and her people. But Zora had spoken of someone that could help them. That small glimmer of hope was enough to ignite a new plan. Zora, still weak but recovering, had begun to sit up in the cockpit. Her eyes had shifted from the steady exhaustion to something more focused, her mind clearly working on a strategy for what lay ahead. She spoke to Jason in a tone that was both calm and assertive. "We need to find the resistance. They're scattered across the galaxy, but they have the strength to fight back against the Rogue faction." Jason turned to her, intrigued. "Resistance? Who are they, and how do we find them?" Zora gave a faint smile, her eyes betraying the pain she was still enduring. "The resistance is made up of those who have resisted the Rogue faction's tyranny. There are small, secretive cells across various systems, hidden from the faction's reach. They fight for freedom, for the survival of my people. I once belonged to them, but after the betrayal, I was forced to flee. There are still remnants of them out there. They may not be much, but they are the last hope against the faction." Jason listened intently. He didn't fully understand the political landscape of the galaxy, but he understood the gravity of what Zora was saying. If they could find these resistant cells, they might be able to gather enough strength to take the fight directly to the Rogue faction. But it wouldn't be easy. Jason knew that searching the galaxy for hidden groups was like searching for a needle in a haystack, and the clock was ticking. "How do we find them?" Jason asked, his voice steady despite the weight of the task ahead. Zora's expression became more serious. "I have a friend who is still active in the Resistance. She's located on a planet in the Rimworlds, far from here. I can send a signal to her location, but we'll need to be careful. The Rogue faction has eyes everywhere. If we're too obvious, they'll find us." Jason nodded, already planning their next move. The Rimworlds were a distant, dangerous place, known for being lawless and unpredictable. It was the perfect place for the Resistance to hide, but it was also a place where danger lurked at every corner. There was no telling who they would meet or what kind of challenges they would face, but it was the only lead they had. He quickly began entering the coordinates for the Rimworlds into the ship's navigation system. As he worked, he glanced over at Zora. Her strength was returning, but there was an undeniable sadness in her eyes. The memories of her people, her past, weighed heavily on her. And yet, despite everything she had lost, she was still fighting for a future one she hoped to share with the galaxy, with Jason and with the Resistance. "We'll get there," Jason said, meeting her gaze. "I'll get you to your friend. Together, we'll make sure the rogue faction doesn't win." Zora nodded, her voice low, but full of resolve.
Thank you, Jason.
"I know I asked a lot of you.
Thanks.
This is more than just fixing a ship. But you're the only one who has ever shown me kindness, and for that, I will fight. I'll fight for you, and I'll fight for the galaxy." Jason set the ship into motion, the engines coming to life with a low hum. As they sailed through the stars, Jason felt the weight of the journey ahead settle over him. They were about to enter unknown space, to face unknown dangers, and to risk everything for a cause that was not their own. But in that moment, as he looked out at the vastness of space, something deep inside him told him that this was what he was meant to do. He wasn't just a man from a small farm anymore. He was part of something bigger, battle for survival, freedom, and the chance to protect the galaxy from the threat of tyranny. The ship broke free from the asteroid field and set course for the rimworlds. The unknown stretched out before them, but they weren't alone. They had each other, and that Jason thought was a good place to start. The journey to the rimworlds took several days, and during that time, Jason and Zora settled into a rhythm. The quiet hum of the ship's engines became a constant backdrop as they navigated through the void of space. Despite the looming threat of the rogue faction and the uncertainty of their future, there was a strange comfort in their partnership. Jason had never imagined he would find himself traveling across the stars, let alone helping an alien woman escape a galaxy-spanning enemy. But here he was, and Zora, despite her alien origins, had become more than just a mission to him. She was a companion, someone he would fight to protect. As the rimworlds grew nearer, Jason's nerves began to tighten. This part of space was known for its lawlessness, its rough planets, and its ruthless inhabitants. The resistance might be hidden there, but so were plenty of dangerous pirates, criminals, and factions far worse than the rogue ones chasing them. It was a place where survival meant anything could happen, and trust was a rare commodity. "Are you ready for this?" Jason asked, turning to Zora as he adjusted the ship's course. Zora, still weak but with a glimmer of determination in her eyes, nodded. "I've been to these places before. I know how to navigate them. But we'll need to be careful. The rimworlds don't take kindly to strangers, especially ones like us." Jason nodded, fully aware of the danger. He'd read stories of the rimworld's places where even the most seasoned explorers could vanish without a trace. This wasn't going to be an easy landing. They would need to blend in, avoid drawing attention, and hope the resistance contact Zora had was still alive and willing to help. As the ship entered the rimworlds, the surroundings changed drastically. The once clear skies of open space gave way to a cluttered, dense expanse of asteroids, abandoned satellites, and drifting space debris. The planets here were scattered, their surfaces scarred by centuries of mining and neglect. Some were inhabited by outlaws, while others were little more than forgotten relics of a time long past. It was a place where only the strong survived. Jason guided the ship toward the designated coordinates Zora had given him. A small, uninhabited moon orbiting a gas giant, according to Zora. This was where her contact had set up a hidden base, a place of refuge for those who opposed the rogue faction. Jason had his doubts, but it was the best lead they had. "Keep your eyes peeled," Zora warned. "The faction might not be the only ones looking for us. Pirates love to lurk around these parts, waiting for an easy target. If we get too close, we'll be sitting ducks." Jason gripped the controls, his mind sharp as the moon's surface came into view. A small, isolated base was hidden in the moon's shadow, a cluster of dilapidated structures and makeshift antennas that looked like they belonged to a ghost town. It was hard to believe that such a place could hide any real resistance against the rogue faction, but Zora seemed certain. As they descended toward the base, Jason's heart began to race. This was it. They were entering the heart of enemy territory, and there was no turning back now. "Stay alert," Zora said, her voice steady, but laced with the knowledge of what could be waiting for them. "We may not be as safe as we think. If this is a trap, we'll need to fight our way out." Jason's pulse quickened. The base was now within range, and as he set the ship down in the clearing, a sense of uncertainty crept into his mind. They had made it this far, but what awaited them on this forgotten moon? Would the resistance be as welcoming as Zora hoped, or had they walked straight into a deadly trap? As the ship touched down with a soft thud, Jason knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, the battle was far from over. The ship landed with a quiet hum on the rough, rocky surface of the moon. The dull thrum of the engines faded as Jason powered down the ship. The low atmosphere around them heavy with the dust and silence of the rim worlds. Outside the window, the base appeared like a forsaken outpost, old structures half buried in the lunar dirt, antennas swaying with the occasional gust of wind, and the distant rumble of the gas giant's storms swirling in the distance. Zora's gaze remained fixed on the base, her expression unreadable. The faint light from the gas giant cast an eerie glow over the base, making the abandoned structures look even more forlorn. She had been here before, but it was clear that she was uncertain of what she would find now. The resistance was scattered, their numbers dwindling over the years. And in the face of the rogue faction's tyranny, she could never be sure who had survived. Jason stepped out of the cockpit, moving toward the airlock. "We need to move fast. If this is a trap, we need to be ready." Zora nodded, her hand brushing against her side, as if instinctively reaching for something, perhaps a weapon, or maybe just a sense of readiness she hadn't had since she was on the run. "I'll lead the way," she said, her voice low and serious. "But we don't know who's left here. We have to trust that the right people are still alive." With a deep breath, Jason followed Zora down the narrow passage toward the exit. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, and a blast of cold air greeted them. They stepped into the barren landscape of the moon. The faint hum of the ship's landing thrusters still echoing in the background. Ahead of them, the structures of the base loomed, broken and weathered, but still standing. The air was thin, making each breath feel heavier. The ground beneath their feet was hard, cracked with the signs of years of neglect. Jason felt the weight of the planet's isolation. There were no signs of life, no bustling groups, no guards standing watch. It felt too quiet. "This doesn't feel right," Jason muttered, scanning their surroundings for any sign of movement. Zora remained silent, her eyes darting from one structure to the next. Motioned for Jason to follow her, leading them toward a large warehouse-like building near the center of the base. "This is where I last saw my contact, Maya. If anyone's still here, she'll be inside." They approached cautiously, stepping around broken debris and over patches of cracked concrete. The base was far too still, as if it had been abandoned for years. But Zora was resolute. She didn't hesitate as she reached the door of the warehouse and pressed her palm against the security panel. The door slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing a dark, dimly lit interior. "Stay close," Zora whispered, moving inside. Jason followed, his heart pounding in his chest. The shadows inside the warehouse were thick, making it hard to see what lay beyond. The place smelled of old machinery, dust, and something else, something metallic, almost chemical. He could feel the weight of the place pressing down on him. Then out of the darkness, a voice echoed through the room, a familiar yet unexpected voice. "Zora, is that really you?" Zora froze, her eyes widening with recognition. "Maya?" she called out, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. From the shadows emerged a figure slender and cloaked in a dark, worn jumpsuit. Her features were sharp, but her eyes were tired, weighed down by years of struggle. It was Maya, Zora's contact, a longtime ally of the Resistance. "Maya," Zora repeated, her voice stronger now as she stepped forward. Maya stepped closer, eyeing Jason briefly but focusing on Zora. "You actually made it. I thought we'd lost you forever." She glanced around at the empty base. "This place is barely hanging on. The Resistance is in worse shape than we thought." "We don't have much left." Jason felt the weight of the words sink in. The Resistance was on its last legs, its numbers dwindling, its resources running out. But there was something in Maya's eyes, something that spoke of survival, of hope. "We're here now," Zora said, her voice firm. "We're not giving up. We need to regroup, find allies, and we need to stop the rogue faction before it's too late." Maya studied them both, her gaze lingering on Jason before turning back to Zora. "Then we have work to do, but we'll need to move quickly. The faction won't stop, and they're closing in on us." Jason looked around the dim warehouse, knowing that what lay ahead was the beginning of a fight that could change everything. The Resistance had a chance now, not just because of Zora, but because of him, a human who had no business being involved in a galactic war. But for reasons he still didn't fully understand, he couldn't walk away now. The stakes were too high. "Let's do it," Jason said, his voice resolute. We're in this together. The atmosphere inside the dimly lit warehouse shifted. The weight of Maya's words hung heavy in the air. The resistance was on its last legs, struggling to survive against a far more powerful enemy. Jason could see the exhaustion in Maya's eyes and the weariness that clung to every corner of the warehouse. But even amidst the despair, there was a spark of flicker of hope that still burned brightly in Zora's determination. Maya, stepping further into the room, gave Jason a curious glance. She had noticed the way he carried himself, how he seemed so out of place in this world of rebellion and danger. Yet there was something about him that made her hesitate before questioning him. Instead, she focused on Zora. "You've been through a lot," Maya said, her tone soft, but carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. "But if you're here, I know it's for a reason. What happened to you? And why bring him with you?" Zora's gaze softened as she looked at Jason. "He's the one who saved me. Jason found me on that desolate planet. He repaired my ship, risked everything to get me here. He's more than just a stranger, he's someone who believes in the cause." Maya studied Jason more carefully now, her expression unreadable. After a long pause, she finally nodded. "If you're here to fight, then I'll trust you. We're running out of time. Any help we can get right now will be invaluable." Jason glanced around the warehouse, trying to gauge the situation. A few people, scattered throughout the dim room, were working in silence. Some were hunched over equipment, others conversing in low voices. The resistance was clearly struggling, their numbers far smaller than they should have been. The weight of the situation was inescapable. The rogue faction wasn't just an enemy, it was an overwhelming force that had destroyed everything in its path. "We need more fighters, more resources," Zora said, her voice steady. "We can't defeat them on our own. But if we can rally the scattered forces of the resistance, if we can unite those who've been hiding, maybe we have a chance." Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. "It won't be easy. Many of the cells are broken, scattered across the galaxy. Some are too afraid to fight, others have been infiltrated. But there are still pockets of us left. We just need to find them and bring them together." Jason took a deep breath, his mind working through the possibilities. It seemed like an impossible task, tracking down isolated cells across the galaxy, coordinating forces that had long since been shattered. But if there was one thing Jason knew, it was that nothing worth fighting for ever came easily. He could help, and he would. "We don't have much time," Maya added, her eyes narrowing as she turned to face the star maps on a nearby wall. "The rogue faction's fleet is getting closer. Their ships are already in the outer rim of the system. If we don't act now, they'll crush us all before we even have a chance." Zora looked at Jason, a silent understanding passing between them. There was no turning back now. This fight, this rebellion, it was their only chance, and they had to fight for it. "We have to move fast," Zora said, her voice filled with newfound determination. "We need to send out messages to the remaining cells. Let them know we're ready to fight. We need to show them that we won't let the rogue faction win. We won't let them wipe us out." Jason nodded, his mind already racing with plans. He wasn't a soldier, not by any means. But he had a knack for thinking on his feet, for finding solutions in impossible situations. And right now, the impossible was all they had. "We'll send the message," Jason said firmly, "and we'll keep pushing forward until we unite the resistance. This isn't over." Maya stepped forward, her eyes sharp and focused. "Then let's make it count. I'll contact the other leaders. But if we're going to do this, we need to be prepared for the worst. The rogue faction will stop at nothing to destroy us." Jason looked around the room at the tired faces of the resistance members. They were ragged, broken, but not yet defeated. They had one thing left, hope, and that was enough to start something bigger. "Let's do this," Jason said, his voice steady. "We're in this together. We fight for something bigger than ourselves now." Zora gave him a small, proud smile. "You're more than just an engineer, Jason. You're one of us now." And with that, they began their work preparing for the long battle ahead, uniting what was left of the resistance and getting ready to face the rogue faction head-on. The fight for the galaxy had only just begun. The atmosphere inside the resistance base had shifted. What had once been a place of quiet desperation was now alive with a renewed sense of purpose. Maya had already begun reaching out to the remaining resistance cells scattered across the galaxy. She worked quickly, sending encrypted messages to every corner of the universe where those still loyal to the cause might be hiding. It was a long shot. Many of the cells were isolated, some of them broken beyond repair, but hope was the one thing the resistance had left. And Zora had reminded them that hope was worth fighting for. Jason, despite his lack of experience in this kind of conflict, threw himself into the mission with all the determination he could muster. He wasn't just a passenger in this battle anymore, he was a key player. He helped Maya and Zora coordinate the message they would send out, each word carefully chosen to inspire the scattered forces of the resistance. "We need to make it clear that this is our last chance," Zora said. Zora said, her voice steady and strong as she looked over the message draft. "The rogue faction is closing in, and if we don't act now, it will be too late. We need all hands on deck." Jason, working beside them, added his own input. "We need to stress the urgency. We've got to give them a reason to fight, something that will make them risk it all. Yes. If they don't come to us, they'll never get another chance to make a stand." The message was sent, yet powerful. "The rogue faction is coming. We're not going down without a fight. If you stand with us, you stand for freedom. We'll unite, we'll fight, and together we'll push them back. Join us or be crushed by them." Once the message was transmitted, it was a waiting game. He didn't know how long it would take for the scattered cells to respond. The silence in the room was palpable. The resistance members worked in quiet anticipation, their hands busy but their eyes always darting back to the communication screens, hoping for a sign that the message was being heard. Hours passed. Then slowly, responses began trickling in. The first came from a remote cell on a moon orbiting a dying star. They had lost most of their members to the rogue faction, but they had enough to make a difference. Next came a message from a heavily fortified colony on the edge of a distant star system. Their forces were smaller, but their resolve was unshakable. Then came more responses. From hidden bases. From people who had been hiding, waiting for the right moment to rise. Jason and Zora exchanged a glance as the replies stacked up. It wasn't enough to match the full might of the rogue faction, but it was a start. It was proof that the resistance was still alive and that it could still grow. Maya, working in the corner, turned to them with a weary but triumphant smile. "They're coming. Slowly, but they're coming." Jason let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It's a start, but we need more. We need to hit them hard." Zora nodded. "We have to act fast. If we wait too long, they'll have their forces lined up. We can't afford to wait." The room buzzed with activity as everyone began preparing for the next phase of the plan. Supplies were gathered, weapons checked, and strategies discussed. The resistance was scattered, broken, but they were still fighting. For the first time in a long while, Jason saw something he hadn't expected. Unity. "We're all in this together," Jason said, turning to the group. His words were simple, but filled with the weight of everything they had been through. "We fight not just for Zora, but for every living being in the galaxy. If we fall, it's over. But if we stand together, we have a chance." Zora placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression grateful. "You've come a long way, Jason. You're no longer just someone who fixed a ship. You're part of this cause. And you've given us hope. You've given us a reason to keep fighting." Jason swallowed hard, the gravity of the situation weighing on him. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a leader. But in this moment, he realized he didn't need to be. He was a part of something bigger, and that was enough. The final preparations were made, and the resistance, despite their small numbers, was ready to move. Their message had been sent. Their allies were on the way. Now, they just had to hold the line until they could gather enough forces to take on the rogue faction. They wouldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. The base was alive with a new energy, a sense of purpose that had been missing since the resistance first came together. The scattered cells of fighters and rebels had finally begun to converge on their last stronghold. Though the numbers were still far too small to match the rogue faction's overwhelming force, there was something in the air, a sense that they were no longer alone, no longer fighting in vain. Jason stood in the center of the base, his eyes scanning the makeshift command center that had been set up. The map of the galaxy was sprawled across the walls, dotted with coordinates of resistance outposts and the trajectory of the rogue faction's fleet. Their position was precarious, and every minute that passed felt like an eternity. The rogue faction was still out there, moving toward them, and they were ready to destroy whatever stood in their way. "We don't have much time," Zora said, her voice low as she approached Jason, looking over the map with him. "They'll be here within the next few hours. We need to hold our ground and make every second count." Jason nodded, his mind already racing. He wasn't a military strategist, but he knew enough about survival. The resistance needed to strike first, create confusion, and give their allies time to assemble. They couldn't wait for the rogue faction to land and take over. They needed to hit them hard, fast, and without mercy. Maya, standing nearby, walked over with a grim expression. "We're not just fighting for survival. We're fighting to send a message. If we can weaken the rogue faction's hold on this sector, others will take notice. But if we fail..." The weight of her words hung in the air, but Jason refused to let fear take hold. He knew what they were up against, and he wasn't going to back down now. There was too much at stake. "We'll hold them off," Jason said, determination in his voice. "We need a plan." Maya's eyes flickered with a hint of approval. "We'll hit their supply lines, cut off their reinforcements before they even land. We've been tracking their movements for weeks, and we know where their key assets are. We hit them hard and fast before they can dig in." Jason felt a surge of adrenaline as the plan began to take shape. This was their chance. A decisive strike could throw the rogue faction into disarray, buy them the time they needed to rally more forces. It was risky, but it was the only option they had. The resistance fighters were already preparing for the assault, gathering weapons, armor, and supplies. The command center buzzed with activity as the final details of the plan were hashed out. Jason wasn't sure if the plan would work, but he had no choice but to trust in it. They were committed now. Zora stood beside him, her eyes focused. "We've trained for this. We've fought the rogue faction before, and we know their weaknesses. It's not going to be easy, but we can do this." Jason turned to her, a mix of admiration and resolve in his expression. "Let's make sure they know they picked the wrong fight." As the final preparations were made, Jason and Zora took their positions, readying themselves for the most important mission of their lives. The resistance fighters moved like a well-oiled machine, their movements precise and practiced despite the odds stacked against them. The rogue faction's fleet was closing in fast, but the resistance had one thing they didn't: the element of surprise. The first wave of fighters surged forward, taking out key supply depots and cutting off the rogue faction's communication lines. The explosions lit up the sky, and the distant rumble of fire and battle echoed through the moon's surface. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Explosion, a signal that they were not going down without a fight. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he fought alongside the resistance, dodging enemy fire, coordinating strikes, doing everything he could to keep the momentum on their side. The rogue faction's forces were well equipped and better trained, but they were unprepared for the ferocity of the resistance's strike. "Keep pushing forward," Zora shouted as she led a squad into the fray. "This is our chance. We can't let them take control." The battle raged on, and Jason found himself in the thick of it, no longer a bystander, but a soldier in the fight for freedom. It was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. They were winning. They were showing the rogue faction that they were not invincible. The tide of the battle began to turn, the resistance gaining ground with each passing moment. It was far from over, but for the first time, Jason allowed himself a small, fleeting sense of hope. They had a real chance to win. But the rogue faction would regroup, and they wouldn't back down. The fight had only just begun. The battle raged across the moon's surface, with the resistance pushing back against the rogue faction's first wave. Jason had never imagined he would be in the middle of a war, let alone leading an assault against an enemy so ruthless and relentless. But as each strike against the rogue factions, supply lines gave them another inch of ground. Jason began to feel a growing sense of urgency. They had taken the initiative, but they were far from secure. The rogue faction would not let this stand. From his position in the command center, Jason watched as resistance fighters moved with precision, their coordination sharp despite the chaos around them. The explosions had cleared several of the enemy's critical supply hubs, and their communication lines had been severed, critical blows to the faction's ability to mobilize. But he knew they were not out of danger yet. "Incoming," Maya shouted, pointing at the screen that displayed the rogue faction's fleet, now rapidly advancing toward their position. Jason's heart dropped as the radar blinked with a series of red dots. The rogue faction had regrouped faster than expected. What had been a disorganized retreat now appeared as a carefully coordinated counterattack. Their reinforcements were arriving, and they weren't coming alone. "We have to hold them off," Zora said, her voice filled with grim resolve. She stood beside Jason, her eyes scanning the battlefield from the viewfinder. "This is their retaliation. They're coming for everything we've gained." Jason's fists clenched at his sides. He had known the rogue faction wouldn't take this loss lying down. But the speed with which they had regrouped was terrifying. Their forces were larger, better equipped, and more experienced than anything the Resistance had faced before. And now, they were bearing down on their base. Zora turned to the fighters around them. "Prepare for a defensive stance. Hold the line. We've bought ourselves some time, but it won't last long." Jason's mind raced. The Resistance, didn't he have the firepower to go toe-to-toe with the rogue faction's full force? They had to think fast, be unpredictable. They needed a new strategy. "We need to create confusion," Jason said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "We hit their command center. We need to disrupt their leadership, create chaos in their ranks. If we can take out their commanders, their forces might scatter." Maya nodded, her expression hardening. "It's risky, but it's our best shot. Their commanders are coordinating everything from a communication center just outside the base. If we can breach that, we can cripple their ability to respond." Zora looked between Jason and Maya, the weight of the decision pressing on her. "We'll need to split up. Can't let them focus on one target. If we hit them from multiple angles, we'll confuse them long enough to do some damage." Jason stepped forward, his mind already running through the plan. "I'll take a squad with me to breach the communications center. You two, make sure the Resistance holds the line here. We need to keep the pressure on them while we take out their leadership." Without another word, they all moved into action, the urgency in the air palpable as the rogue faction's counterattack neared. Jason gathered a small group of Resistance fighters, each of them armed and ready for what was to come. As they moved through the base, Jason's thoughts raced. It was a dangerous mission. They could be walking into a trap, or worse, a massacre. But there was no other option. If they didn't act quickly, the rogue faction would crush them. The blast of an enemy ship echoed overhead as Jason's squad sprinted toward their target. Every corner of the base felt like a potential ambush. The atmosphere was tense, the fear of failure heavy on their shoulders. As they neared the communications center, Jason signaled his squad to spread out. The building loomed in front of them, dark and foreboding. It was heavily guarded, but Jason could see the small weaknesses in their defenses gaps they could exploit. "Stay low, move fast," Jason whispered to his squad. They moved in unison, silently slipping past the guards, their weapons ready. The plan was simple. Breach the doors, take out the guards, and disable the rogue faction's communication systems. But as they reached the entrance, a blast rang out from the shadows. The fight for survival had only just begun. The blast shattered the silence of their approach, sending Jason's heart racing as his squad dropped to the ground. Seeking cover behind the rocky outcroppings near the communications center, the enemy guards had spotted them, and the rogue faction soldiers were closing in fast. Jason's instincts kicked in as he signaled for his team to take cover and return fire. "Return fire. Keep them back." Jason shouted over the sound of blaster shots echoing in the narrow corridor. The Resistance squad responded instantly, their weapons opening fire on the enemy guards positioned around the communication center's entrance. The rogue soldiers were well trained, but the Resistance fighters, though fewer in number, had the advantage of surprise and determination. Jason moved swiftly, taking out a guard positioned on the far side of the courtyard. His blaster shots precise and calculated. He looked over at his squad, who were holding their own, but Jason knew they couldn't sustain this fight forever. They had to move quickly. The longer they stayed in the open, the more reinforcements the rogue faction would send. They needed to breach the door and get inside. "Cover me," Jason ordered. "I'm going for the door." Zora had taught him to stay calm in the heat of battle. And now, in the chaos, Jason focused on the mission ahead. The door to the communications center was locked down, but there were access panels on either side of the entrance control systems he could use to override the security. With a quick glance over his shoulder, Jason sprinted toward the panel, dodging blaster fire as his squad kept the rogue soldiers occupied. His heart hammered in his chest, but his mind was steady as he ripped open the panel's casing and began working his way through the controls. He had no time to waste. Every second that passed brought the rogue faction closer to overwhelming them. Jason's hands moved swiftly over the wires, cutting through the security protocols with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years tinkering with machinery. The system was complex, but not beyond his ability. He could feel the tension rising in his chest, but he kept his focus. Then, with a satisfying beep, the door's lock disengaged, and the heavy steel doors groaned open. "Move, we're in!" Jason shouted. Without hesitation, Jason and his squad rushed through the doors, guns raised, ready for anything. Inside the communications center, the atmosphere was tense. The lights flickered above, casting long shadows across rows of computers and control panels. The room was filled with the low hum of technology and the distant clatter of combat from outside. Jason and his squad moved quickly through the narrow hallways of the center, their blasters trained on any movement. The rogue soldiers inside were preparing for a counterattack, but the resistance fighters were faster. They reached the main command center in record time, catching the enemy leaders off guard. The rogue commander, clad in dark armor, turned to face them just as they stormed in. His eyes widened in surprise, and before he could react, Jason fired a precise shot, hitting him square in the chest. The commander crumpled to the ground, and chaos erupted in the room. The rest of the rogue soldiers inside began to scramble, but it was too late. Jason and his squad swept through the room, taking out the remaining forces with swift, coordinated shots. The control room was theirs. Jason's breathing was heavy as he looked around, taking in the sight of the commandeered communications center. It was eerily quiet now, but the significance of what they had just accomplished wasn't lost on him. They had just struck a devastating blow to the rogue faction's leadership and their ability to coordinate reinforcements. Maya's voice came through on the comms. "Jason, do you have control of their systems?" Jason nodded, though no one could see him. "We've taken the command center. The rogue faction won't be able to coordinate reinforcements for a while." "Good," Maya replied. "That buys us more time. Now, we need to secure the rest of the base." Jason exhaled slowly, but the battle was far from over. The rogue faction wasn't finished. They would come at them harder than ever, but the resistance had taken their first real step toward crippling the faction's grip on the galaxy. "We hold this ground," Jason said, his voice steady, "and we fight until they're gone." The air inside the communications center was thick with tension, the faint hum of machines filling the space as Jason and his squad secured their position. The resistance had struck hard, taking out key commanders and cutting off the rogue faction's ability to communicate. But Jason knew the battle wasn't over. The rogue faction's retaliation would be swift and brutal. "Status report," Jason said, his voice calm but edged with urgency, as he looked over the group of resistance fighters that had helped him secure the command center. Maya's voice crackled over the comms. "We've got them on the run for now, but they're regrouping. We've delayed their reinforcements, but they're pulling in their last reserves. They're coming for us, full force." Zora, who had been monitoring the situation from a nearby terminal, turned to Jason, her expression hard and resolute. "We need to prepare for their final assault. They won't stop until they take this base back. We'll have to fight for every inch." Jason glanced around the room, taking in the faces of the weary resistance fighters. They were tired, battered from the constant skirmishes, but there was a spark in their eyes of fire that refused to go out. This was their last stand. If they could hold the base long enough, they could turn the tide of the war. "We've taken their communication center, and we've slowed them down," Jason said, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the command center. "But now, we have to make sure they don't retake it. We fortify our positions, and we hit them hard when they push in." Maya's voice came over the comms again, its time tinged with the weight of the situation. "They're closing in, Jason. We're looking at a full assault. We need to dig in and hold our ground, or this whole thing is over." Jason exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He wasn't a soldier, But today, he was. And he wasn't about to let everything they had fought for slip away. Not now. Not after everything they'd been through. "Gather the fighters," Jason ordered, his tone unwavering. "We'll make our stand here. If they want this base, they'll have to fight for it. We've got one shot." The resistance fighters, battered but unbroken, moved into position. They fortified the main hallways, setting up barricades and placing explosive charges in key locations. The rogue faction's forces would be coming in waves, and the resistance had to make every moment count. They had to buy enough time for their scattered allies to arrive to turn the tide in their favor. Jason stood beside Zora as they finished setting up their defenses. She gave him a look, one filled with both pride and determination. "You've done more than I could have ever hoped for, Jason, but this is the hardest part." He nodded, his gaze steady. "We fight until we can't anymore." The sound of approaching enemy boots echoed down the corridors, a chilling reminder that the final battle was upon them. Jason took a deep breath, readying himself. He had come a long way from the quiet farm he had once known. He wasn't the same man who had tinkered with machines in his small workshop. He was a fighter now, a part of something far bigger than himself, and he wasn't about to let it fall. "Get ready," Jason said, his voice resolute. This is it. The first wave of rogue soldiers burst through the entrance, and the battle erupted. Blaster fire lit up the room as the resistance fighters held their ground, pushing back against the overwhelming force. Jason's heart pounded in his chest as he fired, the blaster in his hands a steady reminder of what was at stake. The rogue faction was relentless, but the resistance was stronger than they had ever been. This wasn't just about surviving, it was about winning. The fight was chaotic, explosions rocked the base, smoke filled the air, and the sound of gunfire was constant. But the resistance wasn't giving up. They had come too far to lose now. Jason and Zora fought side by side, each of them focused on the mission: to hold the base, to keep the rogue faction from taking control. They were outnumbered, but their resolve was unmatched. They would fight, no matter what it took. And as the rogue faction's forces continued to push forward, the resistance stood their ground, proving that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting for.